Today I'm here with Bruce Fein, constitutional consultant, author, most recent book, American Empire Before the Fall, a man around Washington who's been on numerous programs, consulted with other countries about their constitutions. Today we're going to talk about your book and the American Empire. First question I have, maybe most relevant to what we're seeing happening overseas in terms of the American Empire. Barack Obama. He was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, but he has the biggest budget since World War II in terms of a war budget. What does that say, and where are we headed in this country?
Well, I think, John, without trying to exaggerate, we are living in an Orwellian world where the Nobel Peace Prize goes to someone who celebrates, it's just $1 trillion budget when you add the Defense Department, the intelligence agencies, plus the nuclear programs run by the Energy Department.
And the contractors.
And the contractors as well. And who celebrates the idea that he unilaterally can decide, even though it's counter-constitutional, whether to invade some country under preemptive theory that they are creating a danger to the United States, and insisting that it would be a disaster if we move the defense perimeter of the United States actually to the United States instead of 8,000 miles away. And he gets the Nobel Peace Prize, and he announces rather clearly that the United States needs to be the policeman of the world, that that's what keeps international stability, and he has no intent of retreating from that certain as opposed to an uncertain trumpet. And the fact that he receives the Nobel Peace Prize, I say, is an example of how far down the road of empire we've become, where the Nobel Peace Prize is now associated with constant warfare everywhere on the planet.
Dwight Eisenhower gave us that great warning in 1961 in his farewell address. He said, we have this ominous thing arising in the military-industrial complex. It's going to just wreak havoc on our economy, our freedoms. We haven't listened. Now we're in the midst of this military-industrial complex. Seymour Hersh has recently written, the columnist, that it seems like they're dominating the military-industrial complex. The military is dominating Barack Obama. The question would be, since he is a former constitutional lawyer, came in on the idea that he was going to have a transparent government, limited government, but all of a sudden we've become even more of a military empire. Does it say something about Barack Obama, or does it say something about our country, where we're headed? Is it irreversible is what I'm asking. Is Obama just a puppet?
Well, I think, John, first, I perhaps would call this a terrorism industrial complex rather than military industrial complex, because much of this is the industry that's now in the business of trying to make us safer with body scanners and new methods of profiling and sharing intelligence and that kind of thing. And the second thing, however, the more important, is what Obama's election shows, in his basically echoing the same philosophy of Bush Cheney, is that this is a deeply flawed now political culture in which we operate, in which everything is subordinated to this craving for absolute safety. You just yell national security, you yell war, and everyone says, okay, we'll give up all our liberties, we have to treat people as prisoners of war, we can't have due process and civilian trials anymore. I mean, the example you may recall around Christmas Day when they had this Mr. Abdul Muttalib, he was the Nigerian who had come in and was apparently planning to bomb one of the civilian airliners as it was landing in Detroit. And immediately there's this claim, oh, he's a prisoner of war. We are at war now with one 23-year-old Nigerian. It's not that he can't be treated as a criminal. Of course, he's committing a crime there, insofar as attempting to destroy an aircraft. But suddenly, it's as though the Luftwaffe has come, we got V-1, V-2 rockets, the Soviet Red Army is there, and then all of our due process falls away, and we create this
This is for a guy with lighter fluid in his underwear.
Yeah, yes, that's exactly
ridiculous.
Right. And a single passenger was able to foil the plot. And again, I'm not trying to suggest that these people can't be menacing, just like someone who's a murderer, Timothy McVeigh are. But it's very, very far short of war, which I say, whose defining element is it makes what customarily is murder legal. It's a very exacting standard to reach that level of danger to justify such subordination of civilian law and procedural safeguards here. But I'd say Obama has succumbed, if you will, to the psychology of empire, in which, like in Rome, it was said, first it began to fight to defend itself, then it began to fight to defend its allies, then it began to invent allies so it could fight to defend the invented allies, then it fought to defend its good name, then it found hobgoblins everywhere. And that's where Obama's coming into the equation there, when he says, well, we can't possibly defend ourselves from a plot in a cave in Afghanistan 8,000 miles away unless we have 100,000 troops and spend $100 billion in Afghanistan and use Predator drones. I mean, that's just mind-boggling that such statement would be made. And no other country in the world, John, even comes close to exerting that level of military projection in order to ensure safety. We are the only country in the world that has moved to a legal paradigm in opposing terrorism to the war paradigm. You know, Spain doesn't have it, despite Madrid. Great Britain doesn't have it. Why is it only the United States that suddenly finds that we've crossed this threshold of war when our military budget is greater than the next 30 countries combined?
You know, and you have, when you talk about these things, the blowback effect, which I would see as, and you raised it in your remarks, is the loss of civil liberties. We have Obama and his administration arguing basically against Miranda warnings, and you have rendition and all these things. Does it surprise you that coming on the heels of Bush we knew was up in your face about civil liberties. Obama is kind of a little bit of sneaking under the
Well, he uses euphemisms. You know, he changes the word from enemy combatant to something else. He says we won't call it a war on terrorism.
But he's Bush
that's
too.
all it is. Yeah,
He's Bush part two.
That's it. Well, I call it, he's part of the triumvirate, if you will. Bush, Cheney, and now we have Obama. And to some extent, because he's able to speak more eloquently, he induces a feeling of repose that shouldn't be there. It's like Brandeis said, Justice Louis Brandeis, in his famous dissent in Olmstead against the U.S. concerning wiretapping. You know, it is the people who are well-meaning but without understanding who are the greatest dangers to our liberties, because we're likely to put down our guard. And that's exactly what's happened in many times with regard to Obama.
The sort of left-leaning press has definitely put down their guard on Obama.
Oh, absolutely.
They don't even mention his name when they're criticizing him.
Absolutely. Just to give one example, John, is where we now have an open acknowledgement by the president that he claims constitutional power to place Americans on a hit list where he can assassinate them without any due process.
In foreign countries now.
If he decrees that they are an imminent danger to national security interests of the United States.
But they can happen in America as well. They could execute him in America.
Yes, because he says in the war against international terrorism, the battlefield is every square inch of the planet. It's forever, and since terrorism incident can appear anywhere, then the battlefield is everywhere.
And one of the things you just raised in the remarks to our summer interns, part of our program, they're eviscerating due process, the right to fair hearings before judges, lawyers. We're losing that even under Obama.
Yes. Yes, for an example would be the retention of the military commissions denuded of due process. Remember, what's the defining element of a military commission? It combines the judge, jury, and prosecutor. The executive branch defines the war crime, the executive branch prosecutes the war crime, the executive branch then finds, serves as the judge and the jury, and then the executive branch and the president review the sentence. That's what the Founding Fathers said was the very definition of tyranny. Instead of having an independent judge and a jury of peers who's neutral and you can recuse if they have prejudices, etc., and then you have an opportunity to know the evidence against you and respond. And you can be found guilty or you can be found innocent, but it's based upon fair process and recognition that no one has a monopoly on truth and accuracy in observing events and knowing motivations. That's why we have due process whatsoever, the most important concept ever developed in the history of civilization, because it is an acknowledgement is we can get it wrong, we can make errors. It reduces that element of fanaticism and zealousness that leads to so much misery and clashes. That's the earmark of the United States and other countries, really, that have only scorn for the idea that they may be wrong.